program today is sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace, which we like to refer to as IMAP. And IMAP strives to be an open forum in which journalists and scholars can discuss issues freely and promote the defense of human dignity by promoting universal values leading to mutual prosperity and peaceful coexistence in our global community of nations. Our topic or title today is Religious Freedom for Everyone, Everywhere, All the Time. And this phrase was also used as a clarion call at the recent Third International Religious Freedom Summit, which was just held in Washington, D.C. several months ago. Freedom of religion or belief is not just an optional extra or nice to have, but it's a key human right. It allows everyone to follow their conscience in the way they see fit. However, even in today's world, denial of freedom of religion or belief is one of the most widespread human rights abuses in the world. According to the Pew Research Foundation, almost 75% of the world's roughly 8 billion people live in countries with high levels of government restrictions on freedom of religion or belief, or where they face high-level hostility due to their religious affiliations. Today, Mr. Alan Wilding from the Canadian Highlands joins us to discuss religious freedom in Canada in context of his lifelong journey as a missionary, a publisher, and a grandparent. And through his book, Integral Society, Social Institutions, and Individual Sovereignty, Dr. Gordon Anderson shares with us the role of family and individual responsibility in society in the pursuit of happiness. But before we begin the presentations, I'd like to introduce a video, and it's on religious freedom that highlights the global work of the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation. So please enjoy this video.
As we meet today, the religious freedoms of millions of believers are being violated globally, from Asia to Africa, in Europe and the Americas. People of faith need and deserve widespread support to preserve this vital human right to worship as they choose. In our polarized world, extremist ideologies and totalitarian regimes threaten freedom of religion and thought. Autocrats insist that the state must be the ultimate authority. Therefore, they will not tolerate belief in a higher power. As we know from the Cold War era, communism and other extreme movements lead to the denial of religious freedom and most other human rights. What happens when religious freedom and freedom of conscience are denied? History shows that when people of faith are denied their God-given right of religious freedom, they suffer persecution, violence, and even genocide. Despite this grim reality, there is hope. Many are standing up for religious liberty around the world. With the support and efforts made by the IRF Summit partners and the faith communities of the world, the United States, the United Nations, and all free nations can fulfill their most critical role to advance, protect, and defend religious freedom. That's why the Washington Times Foundation and the Universal Peace Federation are honored to join in education and action together with all partners of the International Religious Freedom Summit, co-chaired by Ambassador Sam Brownback and Dr. Katrina Lantos-Sweat. The Washington Times Foundation is an educational organization that promotes freedom, faith, and family. The Washington Times has also brought great attention to this important cause. Religious freedom is the bedrock for all freedoms. Universal Peace Federation is a United Nations NGO with general consultative status. It convenes leaders from all sectors of the world and all levels of leadership to seek peace based on interfaith cooperation and religious freedom. UPF has a global foundation in 172 countries with support from heads of state, prime ministers, scholars, parliamentarians, and faith leaders. The Universal Peace Federation brings together global leaders around the ideals of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. UPF convenes world summits, the rallies of hope, international leadership conferences, and Think Tank 2022 programs to advance religious freedom and freedom of conscience, speech, and assembly. In 2022, 2 conferences of hope were convened by the Washington Times Foundation and the Universal Peace Federation to alert leaders about global threats to religious liberty. As a result, a global resolution was introduced in support of religious freedom for all and entitled Declaration in Support of Fundamental Human Rights and Human Dignity, Overcoming Threats to Freedom of Thought, Conscience, and Religion. The declaration has already been signed by over 300 heads of state, parliamentarians, scholars, and faith leaders from 55 countries, and support for the declaration is growing rapidly. Dozens of courageous scholars, journalists, and prominent figures from many faiths and cultures spoke against persecution and intolerance.
Religious freedom is the human right to think and act upon and express what one deeply believes according to the dictates of his or her moral conscience.
Freedom of religion is freedom of thought and is an essential foundation of democracy alongside the freedoms of speech and assembly.
In concert with these leaders, in 2022, King Charles stated, "Protect religious liberty or risk totalitarianism." The Universal Peace Federation has initiated a global coalition to take direct action to protect religious freedom.
I've had the opportunity to speak both for the World Summit last February, as well as Think Tank 2022 Global Forum. It was incredible to work with so many experts and leaders on securing peace and freedom in Asia. At the World Summit in particular, it was tremendous to see nations from around the world together working towards peace on shared issues. I'm deeply grateful to the Universal Peace Federation and to the Washington Times Foundation for convening these summits where peace can be pursued. I also want to sincerely commend Dr. Moon for her leadership and for her lifelong commitment to peace. Dr. Moon and her husband have been unwavering in their efforts against communism, which denies God and oppresses the faithful.
Freedom of religion can never be taken for granted. It must always be defended and looked after.
Our hope is in God and the cooperation of all people.
Faith is beyond even the most repressive government's ability to push back against. It can't be destroyed by tyrannical fiat or communist persecution. Any government that denies religious freedom is destined to fall.
To protect religious freedom, we need to uphold common universal values. Religious freedom is the universally shared value embraced by all faiths and people of conscience. Because we have come together as partners at this historic summit, we can and will roll back the persecution of all faiths. We will make sure all nations respect the freedom of all faiths. Let us work together to achieve lasting religious freedom throughout the world.
Well, no matter how many times I watch that video, I'm just so inspired by the global interfaith work that the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation are doing. So I believe this video is kind of sets a good tone for our program today. So let me begin by introducing our moderator today, Mr. Hans Moyer. Hans is currently serving as the Executive Director for the Universal Peace Federation in Pennsylvania, and he's also the U.S. Coordinator for the IMAP, the International Media Association for World Peace. As a first-generation immigrant from the former East German totalitarian state, Hans appreciates the virtues of freedom, faith, and family, which constitute the American dream. Welcome, Hans.
Thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate that introduction. And yes, like yourself, that video really touches something in my heart. Today we have two wonderful scholars and the media activists who have really dedicated their entire lives to peace building. So I'm looking forward to hearing from both of them. Our first presenter will be Dr. Gordon Anderson. He has a PhD in philosophy of religion from Claremont Graduate University and a Master's of Divinity in Christian ethics at Eugene Theological Seminary. He organized a set of comprehensive academic conferences on world social systems with the late Morton A. Kaplan, Distinguished University Professor Emeritus at the University of Chicago. He worked with Alexander Stromas of the Hoover Institute on the Soviet system. Ip Yong Kim at the University of Connecticut on the Chinese system, and Edward Shills at Cambridge University on liberal democratic societies. His integral philosophy developed as the editor of a series of books by integral scholars at Paragon House, of which he is now the president. He developed his approach to integral society while an adjunct professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Dr. Anderson, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction and very suited for what I'm planning to share today on integral society. I'm going to share my screen here and go through some slides today. I think that should be working now. So when I was invited by Hans, I was told to refer to an article by Katrina Lantos Sweat titled An Orphan Right, in which she calls for religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And this orphaned right was Article 18 under the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the freedom of thought. This declaration was created by really the joint effort of two people, two groups. One was Eleanor Roosevelt, who wanted to emphasize her husband's four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom from fear, and freedom of worship. I've got one problem here. There. For freedom speech, freedom of expression, freedom to worship God in one's own way, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Now, Roosevelt was based on the original US founders' view of individual freedom. But there's another aspect that I want to share, and the subtitle of my book, Integral Society, is Individuals, Freedom, and Social Institutions, Individual Sovereignty and Social Institutions. Social institutions play a major role in our world today, a role that they didn't play when the US was founded. And we have to understand that we live in a different world in which institutions are dominant, and they can serve either good or bad causes. In the case of setting up this UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, the issue of institutional freedom evolved. And this was the freedom of the church, not just freedom of individuals, but freedom of the church. A key issue for the Federal Council of Churches in the United States was the right of the churches to evangelize, to send missionaries, to have them protected. And the Roman Catholic hierarchy in the United States had asked Protestants to terminate their missions in Latin America. So the Federal Council of Churches and the Federal Missionary Council formed a committee on religious liberty and asked Otto Frederick Nolde, a former dean of Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, to become its executive director. This right, the right to religious liberty, came to mean competition between religions and pluralism. Nolde and the churches contributed more to the drafting of Article 18 than Eleanor Roosevelt did. So institutions have more power to change the world for good and evil in this time. So this is an orphaned right. In the United States, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator certain inalienable rights. These are the rights of life, liberty, of pursuit, and happiness, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from consent to the governed. The U.S. was founded by individuals seeking personal liberty. The United Nations was founded by states and social organizations, NGOs, to promote institutional liberties. Article 2.7 of the UN Charter, nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are essentially the diplomatic jurisdiction of any state. So states were treated as sovereigns, and historically, leaders of states have pushed aside the rights of individuals, putting the sovereignty of their state first. And when social institutions put their own sovereignty first, sovereignty of individuals and human rights suffers. In Article 18, religious freedom is not the only orphaned right in today's world. Banks colluding with governments deprive people of economic autonomy. State educational curricula indoctrinate children and oppose the rights of parents. Everywhere we see social institutions originally created by people to make their life more happy and efficient, hijacked by leaders who use the members' money and their collective power to promote their own well-being at the expense of those they were intended to serve. The idea of an orphaned right leads to the broader problem of social institutions using individuals rather than serving them. Individuals are being orphaned by social institutions, not only in religion, but in every realm of society. And this is why I wrote my book, Integral Society, Social Institutions and Individual Sovereignty. A central task of our time is to return sovereignty to the people and restrict social institutions and to their mission, and that they serve individuals as they were designed to do. There is too widespread acceptance of the hijacking of social institutions and too little effort to hold them accountable to the purpose that they should serve. Now, if we look historically, since feudal times, we've seen a historical effort to, in the last 400 or 500 years, to move towards individual sovereignty and escape feudalism. In feudal society, elites controlled people and culture, economy, and politics. The church controlled belief and had a monopoly on truth. Emperors controlled the government and monopoly on the laws. Landowners controlled the wealth and a monopoly on the economy. However, individuals seek to escape serfdom and control of their own destiny. The evolution from serfdom to individual sovereignty. The Protestant Reformation initiated freedom and individual autonomy in the cultural sphere. This was aided by the revolution in the media and the printing press that gave everybody an opportunity to gain alternative knowledge by access to printed books and alternative sources of truth, in addition to the Catholic Church. Individual economic autonomy developed when serfs were able to move off feudal land and engage in businesses and trades in towns. And a government of the people is possible when people have cultural freedom and economic autonomy. And this was a situation when the United States was founded. People had sovereignty in culture, economy, and politics. This required moral, economic, sufficient, and self-governing individuals. In the reported statement by Ben Franklin, we have given you a republic if you can keep it. That depended on such people. Today we see elites in increased control of religion, money, and government. They use power to censor religion and speech. They have plans for a central bank digital currency that can control cast citizens into economic serfdom and a consensus of the governed is violated in almost every law that it's passed through corrupt processes. It's interesting just to note the way our cultural is slipped into a concept of dependency gradually. I was recently, my son pointed out to me, ChatGPT was asked to update the Declaration of Independence. And the result of what ChatGPT wrote amounted to a declaration of dependence on government. It looked at all the social grievances in our culture today and thought government should provide everything. So ChatGPT created a declaration of independence that was 180 degrees off of what the founders wanted, and really supported this new feudalism you see in the World Economic Forum and the phrase, "You will own nothing and be happy." The political sovereignty of the state was introduced in the Treaty of Westphalia. Cultural sovereignty of the state is found in Hegel, who argued that the state is the culmination of the march of God or the absolute through history. And the economic sovereignty of the state is a Marxist-Leninist doctrine in which the state has the right to confiscate private property. Today, states everywhere are trying to assert sovereignty in all three social spheres. You probably remember this quote from Ronald Reagan: "No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size. Government programs, once launched, never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth." And that leads to a concept of what you can call the fallen nature of social institutions. I think today we can't just look at the fallen nature of individuals, but we have to study the nature of social institutions and what their fallen natures are. Collusion gives social institutions, collusion with the federal government gives social institutions financial security at the people's expense. They do not need to serve the people, instead they serve the governments that fund them. Like government agencies, other social institutions lobby and seek to attach themselves to governments for their own eternal life. This is an aspect of fallen institutional nature. And we have seen this in the military industrial complex most prominently, and then the Federal Reserve is a banking industrial complex since 1913. And recently in the COVID pandemic, we served to build up the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And we could also say that a state church is a religious industrial complex. Universities that receive federal grants have long produced knowledge that governments use to increase their power. And so there's university industrial complexes as well. And we recently saw that Twitter, YouTube, and corporate media were part of this new developing information industrial complex, which Elon Musk exposed with the Twitter files. So social institutions need to be checked and limited to their purpose. And this includes religious and media institutions, but not the freedom of religion itself. It requires checks and balances on power, strict limits on the use of financial resources, strict and defined consequences for those who misuse power or public money. Freedom of religion is necessary to produce moral leadership, and freedom of the press is necessary to expose corruption. Now, integral society, in my view, social institutions each serve specific purposes that benefit all individuals in society. In an integral society, social institutions work together like the organs of the human body to create a stable society that serves everyone. Individuals, like the cells of the human body, have jobs that perform different functions in service to society, and many times in these social institutions. There is an integral relationship between the three social spheres: culture, economy, and governance. Now, these three social spheres come from three natural social principles: language, law, and money. You may have heard of Frederick A. Hayek, a famous philosopher who argued that there were spontaneous social orders. Language, law, and money appear in any society, from the most primitive to the most highly developed. They're like breathing, eating, and sexual reproduction for physical existence. Language, law, and money are essential for social existence. They should be free for everyone, everywhere, all the time. Restricting the freedom of people to communicate, exchange goods and services, or their human rights is the social equivalent to starvation and imprisonment. And these three social spheres, economy, politics, and culture, often we see contests of one sphere trying to control the other. It'd be like the head trying to control the liver, or the liver trying to control the heart in the human body, instead of having some integral relations where they're all harmoniously working together. You have individual social institutions as well as complete spheres of society trying to control the entire society. It's like a cancer. Now I'm going to just move a little bit here to religion and the media in the context of this integral vision of society I've been trying to present. Religion is one of the many cultural institutions. It contains a repository of tradition, doctrines of belief, and norms for human behavior. This is very important for our individual development, as this is how we learn, by mimicking the traditions that are put before us until we learn how to rationally determine our own identity. Religion's mission is to serve individuals in seeking to pursue a good life by assisting their spiritual, intellectual, and character development. However, as institutions, religions seek to monopolize truth. They seek obedience and increasingly demand more money from their members. They want the government to establish them so they can dominate economics and politics. This was the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. We see it in Sharia law in the Islamic world, and communism as a modern secular religion is an ideology that functions the same way. Official state religions and religious monopolies are stagnant and provide little spiritual nourishment. Receiving state money, priests can comfortably regurgitate inherited doctrines and not try to integrate them or have any motive to serve the people. The non-establishment clause in the US Constitution, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, eliminated religious monopoly. Religion became vibrant with competition in America. Churches were forced to serve people. This is just like a business or any other thing. When you have competition, that competition forces you to serve people or you go out of business. Religion can best serve people when religious freedom is available to everyone, everywhere, all the time. The media, it has a mission. It's also a cultural institution. In free democratic societies, they have a responsibility to report on the most important events truthfully and hold social institutions accountable to the people. Their mission is to provide necessary information to individuals seeking to pursue a happy life holding governments and social institutions accountable to their mission is part of their mission. However, as institutions, the media are often compromised by their source of funding, especially when funded by states or financial institutions. Media that are state-sponsored or controlled by advertisers' money will not speak badly of their funders. The reverse is true. They may be subject to extortion and funding withheld if they do not spin the truth or tell lies to protect corporate or government crimes their funders have engaged in. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution also prohibits abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Alternative media is necessary for truth when people find established media compromised by political or economic pressure. Like religion, the media can best serve individuals when it is free, competitive, and available to all people everywhere all the time. So in conclusion, individuals need cultural, economic, and political sovereignty to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Social institutions can serve individuals in that pursuit or exploit them into some form of serfdom. Institutions are increasingly used as vehicles to exploit individuals. Religions and the media, as social institutions, can either serve the cause of individual sovereignty or individual serfdom. The freedom of religion and of the press and competition to provide new truth to sovereign individuals rather than to control official truth is essential to prevent a new feudalism and secure individual autonomy. And this is a big picture view I've tried to present. It's the way I approach my book, Integral Society. I start back in the ancient Babylonia, work through the Roman Empire and into the present. And I show especially how we've freed ourselves from feudalism in the last 500 years and explain the pressures that are causing this reverse in a form of a new feudalism arising. The freedom of religion and media are necessary for individuals to get knowledge and skills to control social institutions and hold them to their purpose. And in my book, I also present a new updated Declaration of Independence and a constitution for an integral society that secure individual freedoms and restrain centralized power in a world of social institutions that when the US was founded, we never had. I discuss reforms in banking so new wealth is distributed rather than serving a parasitical elite. And these are as important as religious and media are in the cultural sphere. So I will stop there. I hope I haven't gone too long. I know we only have 2 speakers, and I turn it over back to you, Hans.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. You certainly have opened up our eyes to the bigger picture. And I think as citizens of any nation, it is so valuable for us to understand what our responsibilities are and understand what is really going on. So this is, I think, the primary role of journalism is to report the facts and let people know what is happening in their world and how they can actively respond to the needs of this situation. I'd like to thank you again for your presentation. I did put your book in the chat, so if it is available, and I'd like
available as an ebook for $9.99 and as a print book on Amazon or through bookstores
on
Amazon.
Okay, I have the book myself on my phone. I'm working my way through it, so I enjoy it very much.
Thank you.
Our next guest comes to us from our peaceful neighbor from the north, Canada. His name is Alan Wilding, and he is the Western Canada Director of the Universal Peace Federation. He is the former publisher of Our Canada newspaper. Alan is also the founder of his own company, a facility management company in Canada, and he holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Toronto. Alan has been married to Michiko Miyamura for 48 years, and they have 4 children and 5 amazing grandchildren. Alan's going to speak to us today about the milestones on the road to losing religious freedom in Canada. So Alan, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Anderson. Many things which you touched upon, I only thought about, but you managed to convey wonderfully in your presentation. Thank you very much. I am kind of honored to be here. And in my early life, I was born in Southwest Lancashire, close to Liverpool. And the population was divided fundamentally between Catholic and Protestant. And there were quite a bit of antagonism between those two population centers. And upon celebrating their St. Patrick's Day, the Protestants sometimes would go out and throw pepper or salt at the Catholics. Well, when I saw this, when I realized what was going on, I really didn't like it. In fact, I made it a point of making a friend of a Catholic friend, and my parents didn't like that, but I didn't think that what they were thinking was the right way. And I remember long discussions on a Friday evening over bottles of beer. You know, it would usually get round to religion, and the discussion was, is the Pope really Catholic, or does he actually wear red socks? This kind of lack of education in this particular subject. Now, then we moved to Canada in 1966 with my whole family, which was a different experience entirely. And one thing that saved me too intellectually was my mother gave me over my religious education to her sisters and aunts. I was taken to a spiritualist church, a Catholic church, an Anglican church, and a Wesleyan church. So I got a very eclectic education. When I arrived in Canada, it was hippie time, and I was searching for meaning in my life. And prior to leaving England, there was a bombshell declaration by, I think maybe Gordon remembers this, that God was dead, you know, by the Archbishop of the Church of England. This really shocked people. And I've been believing through my humble education that, well, how come this announcement is being made that God is dead? So it kind of knocked me kind of sideways. And so I was looking for meaning and purpose in my life. And I arrived in the midst of 1966 in Canada, the kind of hippie movement. And I got caught up in the hippie movement when I left home. But when I looked at it closely, it wasn't for me. It was just kind of not offering to me some direction or purpose. Then in 1968, I met 2 missionaries who came to Canada to promote the teaching of the divine principle. And eventually I joined in the middle of riots in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 1968, having been sent there to further my education in the divine principle. When I came back, I decided I needed to further my education, and I attended York University in Toronto, and also Centennial College in Toronto, and then on to transferred to University of Toronto. Now, what was interesting about this at the university, my faith was again challenged by what was being taught at those universities. And I'll get into that in a moment. And as our movement was developing, Reverend Moon's name became more and more in the public eye, and we started to receive more attention from the media, and which included parents being, how should I say, thinking that their children were turning against them, and they went to the deprogrammers to actually get those children out of the movement and deprogram them and turn them against their faith. And this was what was happening at that time. Now, in the university, we got indoctrinated with Marcuse, Freud, Marx, B.F. Skinner, and determinism, and also the Watson-Crick invention or discovery of what DNA is all about, also started to lead to the talk about chemical manipulation of the individual. And where are we today? They're talking about removing any diseases or this kind of, how should I say, interfering with human nature, which is, to me, ordained by God. And in Christianity, we are created in the image of God. This gives us dignity and uniqueness. And in response to this kind of determinism, the recent Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia, I can't remember her name offhand, decree that each individual has a unique DNA sequence. So you cannot mold everybody and put everybody in the same mold. And this kind of genetic interference and manipulation was the word I was looking for, is around today. And I think you quoted Professor Anderson that you have own nothing, and you will be part of this mass society. Now, so we've reached a stage where in the recent pandemic, there's talk of science, follow the science. But what science are we to follow? It's based upon this view of control and manipulation of the human being. It's not true science, it's the science that's been put forward by the intellectual school of Skinner and Freud and so on. My own mother is in a nursing home and she is 93 years old. And there's talk of euthanasia, and that's kind of, scary. And I've been trying to also support the local society, which is against this. And there's also talk of less children, which leads to which leads to abortion and late-term abortion, which is, to me, a recipe for murder, to murder those children, to take them out of circulation. We don't need them. And also even, why should we keep these people alive like your mother? Well, she's of no use to society. So we should euthanize her, And my dear mother is aware of this too. Even at 93, they're going to kill me in this place. And I try to reassure her that that's not the case. She has been a very devoted Christian all her life, and she's appalled by this kind of thinking. So we've arrived at biological manipulation and genetic engineering today. Well, and this in my work with Our Canada as an alternate newspaper in the 70s, I've noticed that more attention was being given to crimes of, say, Hitler, which was rightfully so, then the communists, which were still in power, and hardly anybody decided to single out the communists for the atrocities that they committed. Of course, I'm not in any way supporting what Hitler did. So, but even more, I would like to see a balance in the history books of the communist atrocities, which is now amounting to 150 billion. And we now arrive at China, which is involved in organ transplants. The Communist Party of China is supporting this for economic gain. I had a speaker who came and spoke about this, and we had a Secretary of State in Canada who recently passed away who campaigned against this kind of atrocity. She managed to escape from China because she was a prosecutor, and they were busy measuring up her body to take away the organs of that and sell them, which is terrible. And but in my work with Our Canada, I was in touch with different emigre groups, and one of them was Klaus Brobel from Jesus to the Communist World. And he was busy smuggling Bibles into the Soviet Union and other Iron Curtain countries. And I took him to meet with higher level religious leaders in Canada. And they were genuinely surprised, and they received him quite well, but they were at a loss what to do about this particular problem. Also, I was working with Solidarity contacts, and Klaus told me that there was to be a coming revolution in Poland around Solidarity, which happened. My newspaper reported that, and it was quite well received, that there was a coming revolution in Poland at Solidarity. And with the media, there was a selective focus on what was news and what was not news. And no matter how hard we tried to give them an honest appraisal of what we were doing, often the facts were not presented truthfully, and they were distorted. And we went to the Yankee Stadium campaign. We brought I don't know how many busloads of people to that meeting, and they were greeted by, "They're going to take you to be brainwashed." They will take you to be brainwashed, and there was no fair kind of presentation of what we represented. And okay, now let's go back to what's happened here in Canada recently. I will show you this.
I'm sorry, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. We have to wrap it up. Okay, we're running out of time.
Oh, really? I spoke that long, did I?
Excellent presentation, though. Yeah.
In my hand, you'll see we could not go anywhere without this last year and the year before. It's a COVID, that you've had your COVID jab, and this gave the state a lot of power and a lot of control over the population. And now people are realizing that things were not all good about this antidote to the virus. And so I'll leave it at that. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was a wonderful journey through your adventures and discoveries in Canada. Yes, again, we unfortunately are getting very short on time. I do have one question here that our co-founder, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, has said that people often think that politics moves the world, but that is not the case. It is culture and art that move the world. It is emotion, not reason, that strikes people in the innermost part of their hearts. When hearts are changed and are able to receive new things, ideologies and social regimes change as a result. I have a question for Dr. Anderson. What role does religious freedom play in preparing an environment where culture and art can change people's hearts?
Well, first of all, I mentioned that Protestant Reformation was like one of the first steps towards democracy. In other words, without freedom of your own thought and the ability to pursue truth unrestricted, you can't really solve problems or be leaders. There's another thing, and that is the parent-child relationship. If you want to cultivate a kind of a heart that in which people serve others, that parent-child relationship is very important. And I've been thinking recently, how can you apply a parent-child relationship to wider social institutions and aspects of society? And social institutions can't really be parents because they're impersonal, but we can guide them and give them missions that are parental, and religion can help explain what that is. So if you have a religion that is pushing a parental heart, I think you can create better social institutions.
Thank you very much. Alan, what
Yes.
role does the media play in preparing and celebrating such a culture of heart? You were publishing your newsletter earlier, so I just wanted to see what your ideas were.
Yes, I tried to focus on those issues in the community which were not being reported correctly, which were not being highlighted, which were of importance. And for example, we had a case where members of the emigre community who were living in Canada were being subjected to having their wills voided and their property seized and sent back what little money they had to the Soviet Union. And so I brought this out and eventually it found its way to the front pages of the Toronto Star. And this was being aided by a Canadian lawyer who helped the Soviets or the communists to harass the emigre community. The same thing is happening today with the Chinese diaspora in Canada. They've set up even police stations to grab and kidnap people that they want back in China for one reason or another. And right here in Richmond, where I live, one of these police stations was uncovered, and they're doing so in the United States. That was, I felt, my role, to try to report things which the media were, for one reason or another, were ignoring. And it was quite quite inspiring to me to do that, or motivated to do that.
All right, thank you very much. Peggy, do we have any other questions from the audience?
Here's one. A question for Dr. Anderson. You gave an excellent presentation on the problems of freedoms being taken away by the state and social institutions. How do we return the sovereignty back to the people? Perhaps you can expound on solutions that you present in your book.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that has to do. We live in a very complex world with a lot of social institutions. Almost all of them have been hijacked. In fact, one of the strategies Saul Alinsky was proposing was simply to hijack all the institutions. So you've got churches, you've got universities, you've got everything instituted. But the fundamental problem as I see it today, that people are ignorant of is related to money and banking, because the money that is used to fund all these nefarious causes is often printed through this corrupt banking system, where central banks print money to governments and they give it out to their cronies, who are social institutions who have lobbied and attached themselves to the state. So you have to kind of nip that whole process in the bud. And one of the things I believe is that a central bank should not lend any money. A central bank should only be a clearinghouse, and it should provide money to local banks who lend out money for sound assets and not non-productive purposes. So that is one element that is not being sufficiently addressed.
Here's another question. Can you give us an example of a social institution that limits itself to its purpose to serve individuals?
Self-limitation is pretty hard. We often, in the first generation of an institution, the people that found it are idealistic, and they often set it up and regulate it pretty well because they are concerned about the purpose that they set it up for. But the next person that comes in always looks at it as a job. And so immediately, not very long, institutions become sources of money and power for the people working in them. And you have to contain that and keep them on their mission. In my book, I use the example of the Glass-Steagall Act as one piece of legislation historically that returned banks to their mission of banking. They had engaged in speculation and all kinds of other things, and they're doing that again today. But for a while, until 1999, when the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed, we were able to hold banks to a certain level of accountability and to their mission. Now that there are other problems with banks that I discussed, but at least that's one example. We have had laws, but you almost have to get real desperate. Society has to have a real problem before you can convince people that something has to be done.
I think maybe we have to keep the other questions to our extended discussion.
Okay, there's one here from Robert Duffy up in Canada. Maybe I can just read it. If democracy is the antidote to elitist control and corruption, how can an uneducated populace manage complex institutions if they have no clear moral direction? Either one of you might like to answer that or address that, or both of you?
Well, I talked a little bit about that in the presentation, that Ben Franklin says we're giving you a republic if you can keep it. But certain voting reforms would be important. One problem we have in the United States is that elections are hijacked by political parties. You put a party designation after the name of a candidate, and if he doesn't get the party endorsement, or if he doesn't march lockstep to the party later, he's going to not get the endorsement and not be able to run again. So what we have is representatives of the parties. We don't really have representatives of the people. Parties are social institutions that serve as vehicles for corruption, basically. That's one thing that has to be fixed.
To try to respond to Mr. Duffy's question, I believe at the bedrock of this problem is that society has lost its center. And the center was Judeo-Christian ethics and values. And in recent times, they have been trampled on. And there is a confusion of values, a confusion of what is a man, what is a woman, as we see now. And there's a dismantling of civilization basically going on step by step by the progressives, the Marxists, whoever you want to put into that category. So we're kind of moving to chaos, or nothing is holding things together. There's no agreed upon value system.
Well, we are here at Universal Peace Federation promoting universal values, mutual prosperity, and peaceful coexistence. So hopefully our program today, and I want to thank both of you for your presentations and your insights, and we'll do some good. And I think that is the best way we can spend our days. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone for coming today and participating. We will have some time after the official program is concluded for additional questions. If you'd like to engage our panelists, we'll be here for a little while after the program ends.